Good evening. Welcome to the Festival of Books in the Alleghenies 2020 Virtual Author Series. We are so glad you joined us this evening. My name is Hilary Hauck, and I will be your co-host this evening, along with Sharon Hostetler. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Hilary.
Good to see you. Also with us is Dave Pop, and he is our Wizard of Oz behind the screens, pulling the right Zoom and Facebook levers so we can actually transmit to you tonight. We are so grateful for all of our festival authors who have agreed to appear this year for our virtual series. Of course, normally we'd meet in person. Tonight's featured author writes historical mysteries. So I thought we should give a shout out to one of our festival partners, the Somerset Historical Society. The Historical Society is just a few miles outside of uptown Somerset. It's set in a beautiful wooded location, and the indoor center is just wonderful. It's so well set out that makes for a very informative and interesting visit. So last year in 2019, the Somerset Historical Society were kind enough to host our fundraising event. And this is an event we host the night before the actual festival. It's all about camaraderie. It's about, we have live music, we have refreshments, and we have a keynote author. And of course, Somerset is is where Flight 93 crashed on 9/11. So keynote author in 2019 was Tom McMillan. He was such a compelling and engaging speaker. I'm sure everybody there that evening will remain with everybody for a long time. We also use the evening to raise awareness of literacy needs in the area and nationally. And we also raise funds, and we hold a silent auction. And the Somerset Historical Society were kind enough to let us put the silent auction, distribute it throughout their museum so people could browse and bid. It was very, very nicely done. And the funds raised by the silent auction go to support literacy programs. Of course, we could not have done any of this without the Somerset Historical Society and without Somerset Trust Company, excuse me, who is a sponsor for the fundraising event. So we're very, very grateful to their support. Alrighty. And of course, we raise funds for literacy programs, and year round, your local library puts on all sorts of programs and events to raise the level of literacy and to get everybody to love reading. So we're very grateful to them, and we would like to continue to urge you to donate to your local libraries. Also, I would like to give a shout out and appreciation for Shirley Stubbe, our festival treasurer. She organizes the silent auctions for us. And in 2019, our festival team, our fundraiser team, organizing team was headed by Bob Harold. We're very grateful to Bob too. This year, we've asked all of our authors to give us some thoughts about libraries and readings, and we're putting these into posts that we're putting on our social media. So please do follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and we'll be continuing to post those. And that's it. I think I better hand the mic over now to Sharon, who's going to introduce our author for this evening.
Hi, I'd like to welcome Liz Milliron. Liz Milliron has been making up stories and creating her own endings for other people's stories for as long as she can remember. She's worked for 20 years in the corporate world, but finds making things up is far more satisfying than writing software manuals. A lifelong mystery fan, she is the author of Laurel Highlands Mysteries and the Homefront Mysteries, both from Level Best Books. Her short fiction has appeared online at Upagus and Miscali, and appears in the juried anthologies Lucky Charms, 12 Crime Tales, the Anthony Award-winning Blood on the Bayou, Fish Out of Water, Malice Domestic 12, Mystery Most Historical, and The Killer Wore Cranberry, a fifth course of chaos. Soon to be an empty nester, Liz lives outside Pittsburgh with her husband, 2 children, and a very spoiled retired racer greyhound. Liz's books include Root of All Evil and Heaven Has No Rage, books 1 and 2 in the Laurel Highlands mystery series, and The Enemy We Don't Know, the first book in the Laurel Highlands mystery series. And The Enemy We Don't Know, the first in her new historical Homefront mystery series. The third book will be released on August 11, 2020, and its title is Broken Trust. Tonight, Liz will discuss history and mystery. Liz?
Hi. Thanks so much, guys, for having me. It was a true honor to be invited. So I started writing, I'd always written contemporary mysteries, which of course everybody knows is defined as written in the now, whenever now is. But I got the idea for historical. And if you look at bestseller lists or you look at books coming out, it really seems that historical mysteries we have a soft spot for historical mysteries. You know, I see a lot of titles set in World War II. World War I is becoming very popular, the Victorian era. And you got to ask, you know, why? Like, why would you spend time reading about something that is, I can't do math, you know, 50, 60, 100 or more years ago? And I really think we have a fascination with history as people. You know, we like to look at the past. Especially, you know, if you lived it, if you grew up in World War II, you know, you might want to look back at World War II. We all, you know, the good old days. We want to go back to the good old days when things were simpler. You know, we back to World War I. You know, World War II was probably, arguably, the last time that you had a very clear-cut good versus evil conflict. And I think the past appeals to us. It tells us who we are. It tells us where we've come from. So I don't find it surprising that these eras have such a big draw, and so much changed, like especially in the last 100 years. If you look at society, pretty much starting with the Industrial Revolution through now, the rate of change has just been amazing. The things that we've been able to do, and going back into historical fiction allows you to get a perspective on that and maybe learn a little bit. That's not the primary reason I read fiction. I mostly read books to be entertained, but it's always cool to learn something about a time period I didn't know. You know, to get a little peek behind the curtain of what it was like in Victorian England, or, you know, New York of the early, you know, I read an excellent book. It was called The Devil's Half Mile. It was actually about Wall Street back when Wall Street was just taking off. And the title tells you, even back then, nobody thought very highly of people on Wall Street. But seeing, you know, that picture of New York before it was the city that we have today. So I think that's why we like historical mysteries. We like going back into the past. And it's still a universal good versus evil. When you're looking at mystery, the themes are universal. You know, it's not that the motives or the themes were different 100 years ago. They just manifested themselves differently. So when I sat down to write a historical mystery, which was a little daunting, I will not lie about this. There was a lot of research that went into it, but I had to ask myself, you know, how do you write a historical mystery? And some of it is pretty similar to writing a contemporary mystery. You still need characters that people relate to. You know, Betty Ahern in my Homefront Mysteries, she's 18 years old. She's just fresh out of high school. Her fiance is fighting over in North Africa. Her brother is in the South Pacific. She's a working class girl. She works for Bell Airplane. You know, I hoped in Betty that I could craft a character that a lot of people could see themselves in. they could really relate to her and her friends. So you still need a relatable cast of characters. You still need a good setting. You still need a setting that comes alive and really takes over the story and kind of plays its own role. And Buffalo at the time had so many, it was a lot like Pittsburgh. It had so many ethnic neighborhoods that you had the Irish First Ward, and you had Germantown, Kaisertown where the Germans lived, and you have the Polish section of town. And I think one of my favorite reviews that I got about that really, they were like, we love the ethnic neighborhoods really came alive, which I was very glad to hear, because that was something I was really aiming for. And you still need a twisty plot. I'm still writing a mystery. You still need a plot that engages people, and people want to go along with in a mystery, people want to go along with the sleuth and try to find out who done it. You still need the elements of tension and, all those writerly things that when you sit down to write any book, a mystery needs, you need clues and red herrings and false trails and all that stuff. But really any type of fiction, you need a good world, you need good characters, and you need a good story. So I had all that. That was actually the easy part of writing the book. Because really, with a few twists and turns, I think those elements fit in any time period. Like no matter what time period you're writing in, you can come up with those elements. The big challenge and the daunting challenge for me was researching the thing. So, because obviously, despite the fact that you can see my roots coming in and see the gray hair, I was not alive in 1942. So what was Buffalo like? What was the town like? What was the time period like? And there was a lot of research that went along into it. I watched, break my heart, I had to watch a lot of classic movies, watched a lot of Humphrey Bogart, read a lot of books written in the time period, because you have to get the language down. And you can't use words that are modern. You have to be careful. When did that word come into use? Because you don't want to use a word that didn't, I wouldn't want to say groovy man in 1940s, because that phrase didn't come into existence until the 60s. But neither would I want to use a phrase that fell out of use in the early 1900s. So you got to do that, but people talked differently. Their actual phrasing and their pattern, if you listen to a Bogart movie or you read a book that's really good, you can hear the cadence of the language, and it's very, very different. And that will help you get in that immersive, in that world. It helps you get in that world. People talked differently. So there was a lot of research in that. That was actually fun research, because who doesn't like sitting down and watching classic movies for a good weekend, or, picking up, oh dear, I have to read another book. Oh gosh, darn it. Yeah, that's terrible. Geography. I was very lucky in that Buffalo hasn't changed its streets very much. Like the street maps are still the same. But how did somebody get from the First Ward, which is in the south side of Buffalo, out to the town of Wheatfield, where the Bell Airplane factory was, which is up near Niagara Falls? How did you get there? Well, okay, you took the bus. Okay, well, did a bus go that far? How much would that bus relatively cost? Because, was it a quarter? Was it a dime? Was it, you needed to call? Well, obviously cell phones didn't exist. I Betty can't whip out her cell phone and call the police. She has to go down to use the payphone. Oh wait, were payphones even around in 1942? Yes, they were. I leaned on my father a lot for that, because he's a history buff and he loves history puzzles, and he's retired. He has nothing better to do with his time. So I'd shoot off a text and be like, Dad, can you tell me blah, 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 blah? And he'd be like, oh yeah. I spent a lot of time on museum websites. The Niagara Aerospace Museum, that was a great find, because that museum is actually built on the grounds of Bell Airplane. You know, they're part of their buildings are right there where the factory used to be. They have a P-39 on display. So when I stumbled across that website, I was able to connect with a guy up there. He's like, oh, books on the P-39. Here, read this, read this, read this. That tell you all you need to know about, because that was one of the comments from my editors. She's like, I want to see more of what the factory looked like. Well, I don't know what the factory looked like. The factory doesn't exist anymore. But museums were great. Old newsreel clips, watching, like I saw clips of Theodore Roosevelt actually touring up there. And you actually get to see, you know, restored photographs that you can see young women working on planes. It was talk about the rabbit hole of research. I could have looked at these things for hours, but I had a book to write. And I sat down and talked with people who had lived back then. You know, one of my critique partners' mothers. You know, what was it like to be a young girl in the early 40s? You know, what did you do? And she was able to talk to me, and, you know, the ration books and rationing and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I did that. And what did people wear? You know, what would Betty have worn to work? What would she have worn out to a dance? And you'd be amazed at how many pictures of vintage fashion is out there. Everything from sewing patterns of, you know, what people wore, you know, could have made, to what was popular, evening wear, day wear, work wear, everything in between. I mean, really writing this book really could have been I could still be researching, and I just learned so much. I was a little fortunate in that Betty, unlike my Laurel Highlands series, where, you know, my protagonists are an attorney and a cop, so you kind of have to get the procedure correct. Betty's kind of an amateur. She wants to be a private detective, but she's not a private detective yet. So I didn't have to like dig deep into the police procedure of the times, but there is a character in the book who is a detective with the Buffalo Police Department. So, you know, you kind of got to figure out what was it like? You know, what would the police have actually done? But then you also have to be careful, because I would read it and I'd be writing and I'd be like, oh, he would never do that because of the Miranda rule. Well, Miranda didn't come into effect until the 1960s. You know, the cops pretty much had a free reign in the 1940s. It was really up to the morals of the guy investigating. If he wanted to rough somebody up, he could. You know, I didn't have my cop do that because he's a nice guy. But there, you know, so there was a lot of research there, and a lot of trying to really feel like you're in 1942. And a lot of people who've read the book told me I got that right, so I was very happy about that. And those are all the kinds of things that allowed me to take the basics of a whodunit. You know, you got a dead guy, you got a crime, you got some suspects, you got some red herrings, you got some false trails, you got some clues, and really kind of say, no, we're gonna go back a while. We're gonna go back into the 40s, and we're gonna do it a little bit differently, a little bit the same. You know, there's some same elements, but a little bit differently. And I'm trying to think, I had lots of talking points, but those were the major ones. That when I sat down, I said, you know, I need to captivate my readers. Well, how am I going to do it? I'm going to give them a good character. I'm going to give them a good plot. And I want to give them a good experience. And maybe, you know, hey, if they're not familiar with World War II, although World War II is an incredibly popular time period to write about and to know about, but here's a little bit different, because you don't see a lot of, you know, this is yet, when my editor read the book, she said, I really like that you're not looking at the war. You know, nobody in this book is a soldier or a sailor. You know, you're on the home front. You know, what was the war like for the people who were back home? And she really liked that, you know, that was kind of a unique twist to your typical war mystery. It's not, you know, she's not a nurse or a driver overseas, or, you know, she's just a girl going to work and trying to help out her family, and who like some free book art. But yeah, so, you know, to keep people in the moment, just paying attention to the language, to the little details. That was the big challenge. It's just the little details and keeping it really authentic. And I hope I succeeded. And I think that's all I think that was everything, all my talking points. Yeah.
Sharon, you're muted.
So does anybody have any questions?
Well, we have a question that has come in. Well, and you kind of touched this already a little bit. The question came in quite early, and it is from Annette Dashaby, who was one of our featured authors a few weeks ago. She asked, you write both contemporary and historical fiction. Which do you find is a bigger challenge to research?
You know, it's an interesting question. I can't say one is a bigger challenge than the other because the research is different. Like when I research the contemporary, I'm really looking at, you know, what's the police, would the police actually do that? Would a lawyer, how would an attorney, you know, my one character is a defense attorney. So, you know, how does privilege apply to that? Or what's the police procedure? Or how would a cop respond in that situation? But it's all right there. And the technology is not hard because, you know, I have a cell phone and I have a computer, and yeah, there's some research into like the DNA and the CSI part of it. But it's much more, that part is much more immediate. You know, I have people that I have on speed dial, or I have their emails that I can shoot off a quick message and say, hey, I got a question for you. And they get back to me within a reasonable period of time. But the research for the historical, and I think the hardest thing actually about the research for the historical was getting rid of my prejudices, to assume that you knew that, oh, that's old, so it must have been a thing in 1942. Actually, no. I had a reference to Rocky and Bullwinkle, the old cartoon. And, you know, it was like Snidely Whiplash, who was the villain. That cartoon was not published until 1957, I think. So that was out. You know, that was the hardest part of doing the research for the historical, is to assume that because of what you've read or what you've seen or what people might even have told you, that it was actually relevant in the time period. And there was nothing more crushing to learn that, no, you can't use that. I'm sorry, it's just not a thing. It wasn't a thing. The language was hard. I got myself a website that I would just type in the word and it would give me, like, you know, when was it used? Some of the words surprised me that they were not that old. And some of them surprised me, like sugar daddy. Would you say that the word sugar daddy was relevant in the 40s? But it was. They actually did use sugar daddy in the exact same way that it's used now. They used it in 1942. So yeah, it was the hardest part of that, was just getting rid of my preconceived notions.
Okay, now that I found my mute button, and I unmuted myself.
Always a challenge on these things.
I was wondering, what was the inspiration for the book? Like, if there was a specific thing that inspired you to write the book.
My grandmother, actually. It was a call, well, back in the year, in 2016, my Sisters in Crime chapter did a short story challenge that we were supposed to submit as many short stories to as many anthologies as we possibly could. And the Malice anthology that year was Mystery Most Historical. And I thought, I got nothing. But my grandmother actually did work for Bell Airplane in those years. She was a Rosie the Riveter. And she was my starting point. I'm like, you know, how would she handle this? What would have happened if grandma had shown up at work and there'd been a dead body? And that was my first inspiration for the short story that was published, called Homefront Homicide, in that short story. And I never actually really intended to write a novel. And I had a couple people who were like, no, Betty needs more stories. Betty needs more stories. And Betty was like, yo, I got stories. But it was my grandmother, you know, her name was Betty. I named Betty after her. That's where the similarities end. They worked the same and they had the same name. My grandmother never wanted to be a private detective, but she was the jumping off point.
So what would you say is the most important to you in writing good historical fiction? Like if you could give us 3 things or.
I think you really have to you really do have to nail the time period. There's nothing, I have read historical fiction where you do hit that jarring point where the person just completely yanks you out of the story and then that's it. So whatever your chosen time period is, you need to know it cold, you know, pretty much cold. And that includes their dialogue, how they dressed. If you've decided to use a real place, like I have in Buffalo, get the geography right. And don't, oh, for heaven's sakes, please do not use a modern map. Find a map from the time period, because new buildings come up and streets may change. And, you know, but you really, I think for me, the number one thing is to provide that authentic, you know, experience that, no, you're really in the time period of the story.
Fantastic. We have a question from Denise Weaver. She says, your excitement and enthusiasm about your writing and research is refreshing and inspiring. And
well, thank you, Denise.
I wholeheartedly agree. And she asks, do you ever teach any classes or workshops?
I've not. I've never been asked to do so. The closest I came was a panel at a couple pen writers conferences. I want to say it was 2017. Was it in Pittsburgh? No, yes, because this year would have been, even years are in Lancaster, odd years are in Pittsburgh. So it would have been 2017 in Pittsburgh. I did a short story workshop with Susan Thibodeau, who's a friend of mine from Sisters in Crime. And that's the closest I've ever come to a workshop. I would love to teach one. I'd have no problem doing so, but I've just never had that opportunity. And I'm not bold enough to put myself forward.
So can I ask you, is it difficult to get yourself out of technical writing mode and into fiction mode?
No. The hardest thing about, because technical writing is very lean and fiction is not. You've got to spend a little bit more time. So that was that early on when I started, my drafts, the constant comment that I had from people was, I want to know more about X. I want to see X. And I was more focused on getting from point A to point B in the shortest amount of time. That was the technical writing part of it that I've mostly gotten over now. But technical writing is my day job. It pays the bills and I have to do it because it allows me to do the things that I really want to do. But when I sit down at lunch, which is when I do my fiction, it's my sprint hour, and Denise and Annette will be familiar with that term. Hilary is familiar with that term. But when I sit down I pull out my laptop, I find it very easy to switch from, no, I'm done with technical writing for the next hour. I'm in a fiction mode.
Fantastic. And our speaker, our featured author last week, is that Coda?
That is Coda. That is Coda's tail. That is my social media darling. Of course, he's coming and he wants to be on. He's not quite tall enough to reach that, but he wants an ear rub.
Nice. So our featured author last week gave us a question and suggested we ask it every time, and I think it was a very good question. And what you just said leads perfectly into that. Is how has the pandemic impacted your writing?
It's been a relief. Quite honestly. I am not one of those writers. I know that there are some writers who found it very difficult to focus, especially early on when things were so unsettled and we were just had no idea what was going on and how bad it was. I found it a relief to be able to get into a fictional world where this pandemic just doesn't exist. I mean, in my contemporary, they're again, like I said, they're now, but there is no pandemic in the contemporary. And of course, I was revising the historical, and then it's back in 1942, when it definitely didn't. I didn't even have to worry about whether or not to put in a reference. And it was such a relief to be able to escape into something that I could control, and that didn't, turn off the television, turn off the news, and really just get into my own world where I did have control, or at least as much control as a writer ever has. But it hasn't slowed me down. I have deadlines. It can't slow me down.
That's great. And Jennifer Diamond says she thinks Denise asked a great question, and she completely agrees with your energy, with Denise about your energy. It is contagious. So, Thank you. Do you have any more questions, Sharon?
Well, I had wondered why you selected Buffalo, but I assume that's because your grandmother.
Yeah, it was because of my grandmother. Now, I could have dropped grandma in any city.
Mm-hmm.
I could have dropped her in Pittsburgh. I could have dropped her in any city. But I am originally from Buffalo. I grew up there. I grew up in a suburb of Buffalo. And it's not a city that you see very frequently in fiction. Mm-hmm. It's like, people honestly do not fully comprehend the role that Buffalo industry played, especially in World War II. We had Bethlehem Steel, the steel plant, which was actually a nuclear target. Buffalo was a huge target during World War II because of the industry. So we had Bethlehem Steel producing all the steel that was needed for manufacturing vehicles. General Motors was up there, and actually my one character, Lee, works at GM. They were producing all the engines that were used in the Jeeps and the planes and the what have you. You had Bell Air, that was producing the P-39. And we had Ford producing Jeeps and doing automotive parts. So Buffalo was huge in the war effort in World War II. And it was just I didn't feel it was a really well-tapped place to set a story.
Okay, then I have one last question for you.
Sure.
And why is your character 18?
I wanted her to be out of high school, but I didn't want her so old. Like, at the time period, if she'd been older, she would have probably been married with a husband overseas. So I didn't want her married. But I didn't want her school. I wanted her out of high school. And I wanted her kind of on that cusp. She wouldn't go to college, like, at the time. College for women in the 40s was a very elite thing. She's a working class girl. She wouldn't have gone to college. But I wanted a girl who was on the cusp of adulthood and making her own life. And all of the opportunities that opened up to women, because all those plants that I mentioned, with the exception of Bethlehem Steel, they didn't have any men. I mean, women did everything. So I really wanted to explore that concept of a young woman who all of a sudden the world was opened up to her and she could do anything. And actually, she's only just a few years younger than what my grandmother was when she worked. I think grandma was in her early 20s. So she's a little younger than my grandmother, but not by much.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Sharon.
No, go ahead, Hilary.
Well, I have one more question that's come in. We should be rounding up, but can I ask you one more question, Liz?
Absolutely.
This is from Molly Tomlin. She is a technical writer by day two. She wants to know how you juggle. Yeah.
I'm sorry. What? How?
She wants to know how you juggle your schedule, and she's not disciplined. She's finding she's not disciplined enough. Can you give her any advice?
You have to be disciplined. That is, if you have a day job, if you have any kind of day job, you really do have to be disciplined. Now, with the pandemic, I am working, just like most of the rest of corporate America, I am working at home. I worked at home full time before this all started. My dog gets me up at 6:30. Not my alarm clock, my dog. I get him up, I feed him breakfast, I take him for a walk. My work day starts at 7:30. I work from 7:30 to 12. At 12 o'clock, that's my writing hour. And that's when I sit down and I'll get myself my lunch, and my lunch is next to me. And Ramona Long, who a lot of people and pen writers might know, refers to the sacred writing hour, and nobody bothers me during that hour. I used to do that even when I was in the office. When I worked in an office, I would take my laptop to work with me, and all my coworkers knew not to bother me at noon because I was busy. I usually have some day job work from 1. Now that I'm working at home, I can knock off at about 3:30. And then from 3:30 to 5, I've got time to either write new words or today, like, do a businessy, like something businessy. I got to email people. I got to put together graphics for Instagram. I've got to write a guest blog or something. Or like I did today, which is I reviewed the copy editing for the book that comes out in August, or I'll revise the manuscript that I need to turn in August. And at 5 o'clock, the laptop gets closed and I have to go, cook dinner. Now I will ship my youngest off to college at the end of August, and he just turned 18 yesterday. My daughter is now almost 20. She has her own apartment, so she's out of the house. I don't have to, deal with young children, which is kind of a boon. And my son is 18, so he does his own thing. But that's gotten a lot easier to not, if you've got young children, that completely changes the game. But yeah, it just from 7:30 to 5, this is the time I do this. And this is the time I do this other thing. And then I'm done. That's my work day. Just like I would divvy it up at work. I'm involved I'm with several different teams at work. So in the morning, I have to take care of this team. In the afternoon, I got to take care of that team. And it's kind of the same thing. And unless you have that schedule, you're going to find it really hard. And you just got to find the discipline. If you want it badly enough, you find the discipline and you do it.
Well, Liz,
excellent. I will just point out.
I was going to say, this has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
You have a lot of good insights.
Thank you.
Maybe after the session, Liz, you could go onto our Facebook page because people have been commenting.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
asking questions.
Absolutely. They're right underneath the event? The comments, Hilary, the comments are right on the event? Okay. I'll go over there when we're done.
They'll be underneath the live feed, the video.
Okay. I will do that.
So Liz, do you have any good news to share with us?
I do. As you mentioned in the intro, the 3rd book in my Laurel Highlands mysteries, called Broken Trust, is slated for release on August 11th. It will be available wherever books are sold. I'm very excited about that. Just sent off my copy edits today, so.
Yay. And where can our viewers purchase your books?
I'm gonna follow Annette's prompt here from a couple weeks ago. You can find them anywhere you can order books, but I have a soft spot for Mystery Lovers Bookshop in Oakmont. MysteryLovers.com is their website. They order all my stuff. You can go on their web. Yes, there it is, MysteryLovers.com. If you type in Liz Milliron, all my titles will come up. You can go through their website. You can call them. They can get the physical books. They don't do. I'm not in audio yet. I'm not big enough for audio yet. And I don't do ebooks, but they do the physical books. And the nice thing about getting it through Mystery Lovers is they're like literally 5 minutes away. So if you want a signed copy, just put it in the comments. If you want ebooks, your best bet is probably, that big corporate giant that shall not be named.
And since we've been talking about libraries as well, could you tell us what your favorite library is?
My favorite library, and here I've got a little bit of a torn. I live in the town of Penn Hills, so I have to say my local library is the Penn Hills Library. But my favorite library is the Oakmont Carnegie Library. It is an actual branch of the Carnegie Library. I just love it because it's old. It's an old building. It's been there. It's one of the last libraries, actually. I found this out recently. It's one of the last Carnegie libraries to be built. And it's just an old red brick building, and it's cute from the outside. And I know people who work there. I lived in Oakmont for a couple of years, and it's just a nice place to go.
And do you have any special messages for our viewers?
And I would love it to get in touch with you keep in touch with you afterwards. If you go to my website, which is www.lizmilliron, LIZMILLIRON.com. Sign up for my newsletter. It comes out, I promise not to spam you. It only comes out once a month. You'll get a pop-up when you visit the site, or I believe I put the sign up under the contact tab. And bonus, if you sign up, you will get not 1, but 2 free short stories. You get the first Laurel Highland story that was ever published, and you get, yeah, there you go. And you get the first Homefront mystery story. But of course, I'm also, if you go to my website, you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram. But I'd love to have you sign up for the newsletter and talk to you other places on the interwebs.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for participating in our virtual festival of books this year. And we are really looking forward to seeing you in Evansburg in 2021.
I'm looking forward to being there.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. It was an absolute pleasure to have you with us this week.
Yes.
And absolutely fascinating. And I
Thank you,
write
Hilary.
historical too, so I'm listening very carefully to the research. I do just want to point out before we sign off, if anyone at home is watching and you're a writer, Liz has mentioned Pen Writers a few times. It is a statewide and beyond writing organization with so many resources and support network.
Yes.
It has everything you need. Yes.
Yes, if
So
you
go
want to try to be a writer,
penwriters.org.
you should be a member of Pen Writers. And if you want to try to be a mystery writer, you should be a member of Sisters in Crime. That's another, we have a local chapter. Those are 2 organizations I can't recommend highly enough.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much, Liz. And please join us next week, same place, same time. And our featured author next week will be Jim Rada. So we're really looking forward to that. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Night. Good night to our viewers as well. Thank you.